My name is Phil Steiger, and I want to welcome you this evening to our Every Thought Captive event. We're glad that everyone is here. Now, if you haven't been to one of our events before, I want to introduce just briefly a little bit about us and about what we do. I'm the pastor of Living Hope Church. Living Hope Church puts these events on. We're actually not all that far from here. We're just a little bit west of Bijou and I-25. But we believe that it is important to be able to talk about some of the really big issues of the day from our Christian point of view, but to be able to do it winsomely and thoughtfully and in such a way that everyone can be a part of the conversation. Now, from my point of view, there's not enough of that going on in our culture. So we're thankful for the chance that we have to be able to provide that kind of forum for everybody this evening. Now, if you want to follow up on any of our other resources from our other events and our other information, you can interact with us on our website, everythoughtcaptive.org, or on our Facebook page. You also should have received 3 pieces of information on your way in. The small business size card is just some information about the church. That's our invitation to you. You're free to come anytime that you like. And you also were given a postcard-sized piece of information. This is a response card. Now, if you feel free to fill this out, just name and email, and then a question on the back about potential future events, and then leave that on the table in the back, that would be marvelous. We only use these emails as information for future Every Thought Captive events. So that's all that we'll use this information for. So we'd love to have it if you feel free to give that to us. And there was also a sheet of paper with notes for the evening. And if you weren't able to get one of those on your way in, we'll make sure that you're able to grab some of those. We have some extra copies in the back as well. Now, before I get too deep into the introduction, I want to say thank you to the team of people who made this evening possible. The Cliff House has been wonderful to us. So as you see their staff, tell them thank you for what they've done and made possible for us this evening. And then I also want to thank the team that helped make this possible, Pastor Ryan Bachman and those who are helping with the AV Tech. Really appreciative for that. That has been an adventure this evening already, but it's all working out, which is really good news. I also want to thank Ryan Popino, who's done a lot of work interfacing between the event and the church and the Cliff House. He's helped set up a lot of things for us there as well. I want to say a special thanks to Tammy Coleman and Bethany Fellowship. Tammy is the pastor at Bethany Fellowship, and they have been instrumental in helping put all of this together. So I want to make sure we say thanks to everyone for all of their help in making this happen. Now, tonight we get to spend some time on the topic of Jesus in Islam and Christianity. How do 2 of the world's major historical faiths view the man who is arguably the most influential figure in human history? Now, this is an important issue. Now, for centuries, Christianity and Islam they've interacted with each other around the geographical fringes, where people of those faiths have lived literally next door to each other. But in case you haven't noticed, our geography is changing rapidly. And we can't necessarily leave these kind of conversations to the fringes, so to speak. And it's good for us to be able to do this evening. And it's important for us also, I believe, to be honest about our beliefs, to be thoughtful and respectful toward our neighbors, but then also to put the kind of work in that's required to seek the truth about matters like this. Now, I'm also very excited about our speaker this evening. I'm glad to finally get a chance to meet Mary Jo Sharp, a Christian scholar and someone whose work I've grown to respect over the last couple of years. Mary Jo Sharp is an assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University. She's also on the faculty of Summit Ministries, and they're actually just sort of across the street from here, not that far away at all. She's author of several books, including Why Do You Believe That? And Defending the Faith, Apologetics in Women's Ministry. And she's a contributing author to several volumes, including A New Kind of Apologist, and that's forthcoming, is that correct? It's out now, so A New Kind of Apologist would just recently be out then, right? Okay, brilliant. And she's also the founder of Confident Christianity, a wonderful website with a lot of tremendous resources. As for the format this evening, Mary Jo Sharp will speak, and then she will facilitate a question and answer time. And when we've hit the appropriate time, I'll come and close the evening. So if all of you don't mind welcoming with me, Mary Jo Sharp.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad you all made it and you're in one piece. Nobody got taken away by a tornado or anything. There was some serious hail on I-25. There were people pulled off the side of the road, so very glad that you all are safe. I hope your vehicles are safe as well. All right, well, tonight we get to discuss an area that actually I never meant to get involved with. I never sought out learning about Islam. In fact, it was when I went to college for an apologetics degree. I went to Biola University to get a degree in apologetics as part of my search for answering my own questions about why I said I believed what I did. And what, lo and behold, in my class was a former Muslim from whose family's from Pakistan. And we became friends, and it was getting involved with, it's Nabeel Qureshi, and if you haven't read his book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, you really should. It's a great book. I think it hit a New York Times bestseller. But he was in there, and we became friends, and I started doing debates with him and his friend David Wood, where I sort of started facilitating their debates, and they slowly snuck me in to more and more responsibility until finally they said, hey, you need to be doing this as well. So I have 2 public formal debates with Muslims online. You can watch them on YouTube. So just Google me or go to YouTube and find me. That's how I got involved, was through friendship. And I kind of like that was my entrance into this, because as you'll see tonight when we look at Jesus as one Messiah, but you're looking at 2 different faiths, what we're looking for is how we can talk to people about Jesus, and especially how we can talk to Muslim friends, right? What can we talk about? And one of the main things that we can talk about, because we share, is Jesus Christ. So that's what I'm hoping you'll see, some of the major differences and similarities that we have. All right, there are many different opinions on who Jesus is or claimed to be. And in fact, I brought some photos here of what you might see driving around. You might see this along the side of the road on a billboard, Jesus is Muslim. I like that, yes, we use the present tense. You might see, if you spend some time on the internet, you might find an internet meme. See, I'm very up to date. I know what a meme is. I may be a college professor, but I know what a meme is. And you might see something like this: I love Jesus, do you? This Muslima saying this. You might also see some other billboards like Jesus is a prophet of Islam. That's very intriguing, right? And then I like this meme, I love Jesus because I'm Muslim, right? So there's a lot of ideas that we might come across. There's a lot of statements that we can see, and we can say, hey, that seems kind of similar to Christianity. In fact, it seems to support the Christian ideal about love, about Jesus Christ. And the Christian ideal about Jesus, we see that he's a prophet there. So we can see already that we have some common ground that we can touch on, but we want to look at the text of Islam to see what it actually says about who Jesus really is in Islam. Beyond the slogans, beyond the campaigns, beyond the, hey, we're kind of like you stuff that we might see when we're out and about. So we're going to do that by looking at 3 different points tonight. First, we'll look at the Muslim beliefs about Jesus, and we're going to delve into the Muslim text, which is why you have an outline, I hope, because I'm going to throw a lot of Quranic scripture at you, and just saying it can kind of just become like running around in your head, but when you have it there, you can see it and look at it. And then we'll contrast that with Christian beliefs about Jesus, and then we're actually going to take a moment to look at how humans believe in general and just human belief in general. All right, so we're going to get started with Muslim beliefs. Okay. First of all, let's start with some general beliefs. So if you talk to a Muslim, they, like Christians, have certain things that they believe. And some of them know more things, some of them know less things than others. They're like Christians, right? What they know depends on who they are and how they were educated. So I want to start with first general things that pretty much any Muslim could tell you. Jesus was virgin born, according to Surah 19, Surah being a chapter of the Quran. So when I say surah, it's chapter. Surah 19, verses 16 through 22, that gives you the story of Jesus' virgin birth. So you hear about Mary and about the virgin birth of Jesus. So they actually believe Jesus was virgin born. That may be something that you knew or didn't know about Islam and Muslim beliefs. Jesus is a prophet of God. That's something that we see that point of connection on those billboards, and you may have already known that Jesus was a prophet in Islam. But yeah, he's a prophet. You're going back to that same passage from Surah 19. In that section, there's a part where Jesus, as a baby, speaks from the cradle. And this is one of the evidences that he is a great man, that he's a prophet, because he has extraordinary powers even from the time he's a baby. And he doesn't just cry, he speaks. Yeah, he uses very good wording. All right, Jesus predicted the coming of Muhammad. Surah 7, 157 says that those who follow the messenger, that's Muhammad, the unlettered prophet, whom they find mentioned in their own scriptures in the law and the gospel, it is they who will prosper. So in the Quran, it says that the messenger, that Muhammad is found in the law and the gospel, referencing the Torah and our gospel, right? So that's one of the reasons they believe that Jesus predicted the coming of Muhammad, because it was in the gospel that Jesus gave. But further, they might point to Deuteronomy 18:18 and say, well, here's what Moses said, right? And Jesus would affirm Moses. So here's what Moses said. He said, I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brethren, and I will put my words in his mouth, and I shall speak to them all that I command. Okay, so Deuteronomy 18:18, talking about a prophet, somebody coming from that's like you. But the problem that we know is that Moses is speaking to Israel, right? That's who he's speaking to. But this is one of the passages that Muslims might go to say, hey, the law talks about the coming of Muhammad. Further, they say the gospel talks about Muhammad. So Jesus, in his teaching in John 14, said, and I will pray to the Father, and he will give you another helper, okay, that helper may abide with you forever. Muslims believe that helper here has been mistranslated. So if you didn't know, the gospel that we have, according to Muslim believers, is corrupt. It's corrupted when it got written down. Jesus didn't preach exactly what we have today. So this is one of those errors. That word helper should be the praised one. So instead of paraclete in the Greek, it should actually have been parakletos. So that's what he's saying, right? Or that's what a Muslim might point you to, is that Jesus is saying, hey, he actually said praised one. We have a corrupt version of the gospel. But if we keep reading in John 14, that's a problem. Because if you keep going on, Jesus actually explicitly tells you who the helper is. And he says, but the helper, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send, will teach you. So he names him the Holy Spirit. But again, this is an example of why Muslims believe that our gospel is corrupt, and why the messenger of God came and gave the correct understanding of the gospel even. He gave the correct understanding. He was the fulfillment of all the prophets. So if you talk to a Muslim, you're going to find out that they believe Jesus was virgin born, that he was a prophet of God, and that he predicted the coming of Muhammad. Okay, those are some of the basic things that they know. They will also tell you that Jesus was Messiah. In fact, it was a few years back that ABC did an Islam 20 and 20 Q&A. They did a whole series on it. And in there they have some scholar or some guy, I'm not sure, a Muslim man that they've pulled in, and he says Jesus is the Messiah. The problem is that Messiah is transliterated into their Arabic, so it doesn't have meaning for them like it does for the Jews. You have to go back to the Jewish scripture to get the meaning for Messiah. Now, we know from the Jewish scripture and from the Christian scripture that the Jews had long awaited a coming prophet. He was prophesied, a coming figurehead. And it was in Daniel where we find that he gives the son of David the express title, the Anointed One, HaMashiach, the Messiah. Right? That's where we find it. And you can find an explanation of Messiah in Daniel 7:13 through 14. But without an explanation in Islam, you actually have to go back to the Christian and Jewish scriptures to find that Messiah. What does Messiah mean? Even though they believe he's Messiah. So what might they know? Well, they might say that the Messiah was the one who called the believers back to the true worship of God. So Jesus is given the title Messiah because he was one of the prophets that called people back to the true worship of God. They might say that. In fact, the Quran calls Jesus Messiah 11 times in 9 different verses. So it's a lot of times that's used. One of the names, or one of the explanations that are given by Muslim lexicographers is that Jesus was the Messiah because he anointed the eyes of the blind to cure them. Lexicographer, excuse me. If anybody in here is a lexicographer. He could cure the blind, right? He laid his hands on them. They say this is evidence of, this is why he's given the title Messiah. So Jesus was Messiah. It was a title given to him as a prophet. Jesus never died. I think you knew that they believed that. Jesus never died. My first debate with a Muslim was on this very point. Did Jesus die on the cross? And here is where Muslims are using Old Testament, that an accursed man is one who hangs on a tree. They're using Old Testament to say a prophet is not an accursed man. He's a favored one of God. So you can't hang him on a tree. So therefore, Jesus couldn't have been put up on this cross because he would be therefore accursed according to the law. No prophets are accursed. So therefore, my debate was centered around, did he die on the cross? Because the Muslim says, no, he couldn't have. And then that would make him accursed and he would not be a prophet. But that's what they believe from Surah 4, 157 to 158 says, for of a surety they killed him not. Nay, God raised him up to himself, and God is exalted in power and wise. So Jesus didn't die. He was taken up to God. In fact, if you talk to a person about this, you'll come to understand that they believe that somebody else was put on the cross, and Jesus' likeness was put on that person. And they'll speculate on who that was. Sometimes they give you Judas. Since he betrayed Jesus, he was put on the cross, and Jesus' likeness was put on him. So that's who they actually killed. And then, of course, they do not believe Jesus is God. And that comes straight from the Quranic text, Surah 5:72. They do blaspheme who say, God is Christ, the Son of Mary. But said God, O children of Israel, worship God, worship my Lord and your Lord. Whoever joins other gods with God, God will forbid him the garden, and fire will be his abode. There will for the wrongdoers be no one to help. This is a pretty serious accusation, right? There is no God but God. Do not ascribe deity to anyone else, including Jesus. So Jesus is not God. All right, those are some general Muslim beliefs. I'm going to go a little bit more specific on Jesus in the Quran. So we already know that he's virgin born, and that comes out of that Surah 19 passage that you can read and go through there. But we also find out that Jesus is sinless. He's a sinless prophet. I put it on Do Not Disturb, but it's still talking to me. So Jesus is sinless, and I'm going to park here for a little bit because this is an important point. He's also, depending on the translation, he's faultless or holy. Okay, those are the different words used there. By contrast, all the other prophets of Islam have sinned. Okay, they're all in need of forgiveness. So I'm going to try to get back here so I can read to you some of them. But we'll see how that goes. We didn't expect that with the phone. We should have thought that through. All right. So Adam, who is a prophet in Islam, Adam from Adam and Eve, that one, the first man, said, well, the Lord called to him. He called to Adam and Eve and saying, did I not forbid you from that tree and tell you Satan is an open enemy to you? They, that's Adam and Eve, said, O Lord, we have wronged ourselves. If thou forgive us not and have not mercy on us, surely we are of the lost. Surah 7, 22 through 23. So Adam has sinned. He had to ask for forgiveness. Abraham, who's considered a prophet in Islam, Abraham said in Surah 26:82, and who I ardently hope, talking about God, will forgive me my sin on the day of judgment. Okay? Abraham's asking for forgiveness of sin. Moses said, my Lord, I have wronged my soul, so forgive me. That's Surah 28:16. Jonah, prophet, another prophet in Islam. So now you're getting a list of a lot of the similar prophets that we have as well. Jonah, a prophet in Islam, and the fish swallowed him while he was blameworthy. Surah 37:142. But there's one more we need to cover. Muhammad. So in Surah 47:19, so know, O Muhammad, that there is no God save Allah, and ask forgiveness for thy sin and for believing men and believing women. And there are also traditions talking about Muhammad asking for forgiveness and being worried about that day of judgment. So even Muhammad himself is not sinless as a prophet in Islam. That's a pretty big point there with Jesus. So virgin born and sinless. All right, Jesus came to confirm the Torah according to the Quran. In Surah 61:6, and when Jesus, the son of Mary, said, O children of Israel, lo, I am a messenger of Allah unto you, confirming the Torah, which is between my hands. Okay, confirming it, and bringing good tidings of a messenger who cometh after me. So Jesus confirms the Torah. That's in the Quran. Jesus told people not to worship himself nor Mary. I think this is a fascinating point. So a little bit of history about time frame here. You're dealing with the 6th and 7th century for Muhammad and for the revelation of the Quran. So that's about the time frame. So Christianity had been in this area for a while, several hundred years, and had spread, right? And you have enough time now for Christianity to have different sects. And they are now possibly teaching different things, which is, you kind of see where I'm leading here. Let me read to you what Surah 5, 116 through 117 says. Allah will say on the day of resurrection, O Jesus, son of Mary, did you say unto men, worship me and my mother as two gods beside Allah? Okay, this is the Quranic scripture. Did you say, worship me and my mother? And he will say, this is Jesus, glory be to you. It was not for me to say what I had no right to say. Had I said such a thing, you surely would have known it. You know what's in my inner self, though I do not know what's in yours. And he said, never did I say to them aught except what you did command me to say, worship Allah, my Lord and your Lord. So the reason this is so interesting is this is one of the passages used to combat the Trinity. Right? This is combating the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. Muslims actually believe, because we believe in the Trinity, that we're like polytheists. They may not come out and say you're a polytheist because they don't want to be offensive, right? Like you don't want to come out and say things offensive of other people's beliefs. But that's kind of what's going on there. So it's interesting because it seems that somewhere in that Arabian Peninsula, somebody came into contact with people who were venerating Mary to the point where Mary was thought to be part of the Trinity. Okay, so I don't know if those were the Byzantine Christians or the Ethiopians. I don't know who was doing this in that area, but it seems as if Muhammad came into contact with some people who had a high enough view of Mary that they thought that she was part of the Godhead. Another interesting fact is that the Quran, as revealed by the all-knowing God of the universe, reports it this way. So it appears as if Allah got the Trinity incorrect, right? But he's Allah, he's God. So he would have been able not only to correct Muhammad, correct those bad teachings, or correct the people in that area, but he would have been able to reveal the correct Trinity to Muhammad and then say, and don't worship that, right? There's no Holy Spirit, Jesus, and God as Trinity. But instead, we get Mary. All right, so not to worship Mary. Jesus' second coming is associated with the judgment. All right, so you have a point of connection here in that we expect Jesus to return just like Muslims expect Jesus to return. Okay, so he's coming. There's some differences though. But the Quran says, and Jesus shall be a sign for the hour of judgment, Surah 43:61. All right, the New Testament, Matthew 24 says, then will appear, 24:30, then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven, and all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So we've got these signs going on. But in Islam, Jesus is actually coming as a witness against Christians and Jews. He comes in the second coming, he testifies against Christians and Jews, witnesses against them. Surah 4:159, there is not one of the people of Scripture but will believe in him before his death, and on the day of resurrection, he will be a witness against them. Jesus is a witness against us, if you are a Christian. All right, so Sheikh Kabbani, the chairman of the Islamic Supreme Council of America, he clearly articulates the Islamic perspective regarding Jesus' evangelistic role when he returns. He says this, like all prophets, Prophet Jesus came with a divine message of surrender to God Almighty, which is Islam. This verse, the one I just read, this verse shows that when Jesus returns, he will personally correct the misrepresentations and misinterpretations about himself. He will affirm the true message that he brought in his time as a prophet, and that he never claimed to be the Son of God. Furthermore, he will reaffirm in the second coming what he prophesied in his first coming, bearing witness to the seal of the messengers, the Prophet Muhammad. In his second coming, many non-Muslims will accept Jesus as a servant of the Almighty, of Allah Almighty, as a Muslim and as a member of the community of Muhammad. So that's the explanation of what's going on there. He's a witness against Jews and Christians. All right, Jesus has miracles in the Quran. Now, you know he has miracles in the Bible, but he also performs miracles in the Quran. And you should have this list as well. He spoke immediately at birth. We're back to that Surah 19 passage. For some reason, I've just slipped my mind. Mary didn't want to talk at that point of his birth. She didn't want to talk to the people, even though they pressed her. This is the Quran, story from the Quran. And so she said, talk to him, like talk to the child. And that's when Jesus spoke. So he talks to them immediately at birth. Jesus breathed life into clay birds. If wondering where this may have come from, apparently this was some kind of tradition, like a extra biblical story that was floating around. And it ends up coming into the Quran. Jesus healed the lepers. He raised the dead. It's all from that same passage. And he healed the blind. So he has quite impressive miracles, raising the dead, right? It's very impressive. Okay, so what I want to do here on the next slide is I want to do a comparison. So in looking at the text of the Quran, I want to look at Jesus and Muhammad, right? I didn't give you the verses on Muhammad. There's a lot of them. But since we're not going to order out for pizza and stay all night, I figure you can do some investigation on your own. But Jesus versus Muhammad, just in the text of the Quran, you've got Jesus is virgin born, right? And obviously Muhammad's not. Jesus lives a sinless life, but Muhammad has to ask forgiveness of his sins. Jesus performs miracles. In the Quran, no miracles of Muhammad. Now, there's some debate on this in the Islamic community as to whether he really does have a miracle, because you might argue that the Quran, because it is the most beautiful piece of literature that has ever existed, that in itself is a miracle. So there's some argument over whether or not he has a miracle. The dead are raised, but Muhammad has not raised the dead. And then Jesus is a sign for man, whereas Muhammad is not a sign for man. And Jesus never died, but Muhammad died. So this is an interesting list, because Muhammad is called the seal of the prophets, which is the end of the prophets. But he's also called the greatest of the prophets. He's the most excellent person who ever lived, and he is the model for all mankind. So now we're talking about qualitatively, we're talking about who he is as a person. There's the moral aspect of who he is. If I look at that and I compare the two, I find that according to the Quran, Jesus is actually qualitatively the greater prophet, according to the text. Now, that's going to be hotly disputed. There's a point where you can talk to a Muslim and say, hey, but Jesus, look at him in the Quran. And they are not going to agree with you on that. In fact, you might get a response of, well, we don't compare the prophets. We're not supposed to compare the prophets. You're supposed to honor all of them. Or you might get the response that, well, Muhammad's the seal. He's the end. So he was the one that we're supposed to follow. And he restored the correct worship of the true God, like Jesus' actual message. So you might get some of those answers in response, or you might get the answer that the Quran actually says that some of the prophets are favored over the others. So those are a couple of responses you would get. If you were to point this out and say, tell me about this, because this looks like Jesus is the greater prophet qualitatively. Like God's really honoring this prophet. All right. So, bless you. We're going to move on to contrasting that with the Christian beliefs. So now let's just take a quick look at what Christians believe about Jesus. I know that there are probably a lot of Christians here, probably even from the church, but it's good to see these like back to back. You know, what do the Muslims believe about Jesus? What do we believe? Okay. So let's check these out. First of all, obviously, Christians believe Jesus is God. So according to Mark 14:62, which is an important passage when we're talking to Muslims, and we'll get to that in just a moment, but this is the first time that Jesus acknowledges that he is the Christ before the Jewish Sanhedrin. So he's asked we'll back up to 61. He's asked by the high priest, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" And Jesus says, "I am." Right? He could have stopped there. It's already bad enough by calling himself the title that Moses received from God, right, in the burning bush. So I am. He's already equating himself there. But he goes on, "And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven." And the high priest, now here's his response. The high priest to this statement tears his garments, right? And he says, "What further witnesses do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision?" He accuses Jesus of blasphemy. You don't get accused of blasphemy if you're not making a claim of deity, right? Or somehow equating yourself with God or doing something at that level that's against the Lord. So here's what's going, we kind of have this scene in Mark, and Jesus doesn't overtly say, "I am God," does he? He doesn't say it that way. And the reason I brought up earlier that sometimes this is important for your conversations with Muslims, because Muslims will say, Jesus never called himself God. Jesus never said, "I'm God, worship me." Okay, well, let's look at what's going on in this passage. Let's do an example from today. If you and I were to observe a boy and a girl in a room, and the girl is crying, and the boy says to her, "Hey, look, I'm dating someone else now," right? And she's just tearing up. The girl responds that way. She's sobbing. We all know what just happened. The boy doesn't have to say, "I'm breaking up with you," right? If he says, "Hey, look, I'm dating someone else now," and she's crying and she's sobbing, we know that this is a breakup going on without them being express about saying it that way. when the Jewish leaders tear their garments, when the Jewish leaders accuse Jesus of blasphemy in response to his statement, we don't need someone there going, hey, he just said he was God. Right? That's what's going on. He just said he was God. So that's how we know what Jesus' statement was understood by those Jewish leaders to be blasphemy. Further, in John 1 through 18, or 1 through 8. We'll shorten it up. I'm actually going to do 1 through 3 here for you, but you can do the whole passage. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything that was made. Okay, so what are we seeing there? Well, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was with God, right? All things were made through him. Whoever they're talking about, which we know to be Jesus, all things were made through him. Jesus is given the title of creator here, right? Not creation, not a human, not a prophet. In this passage, he's given the title of creator, who has creative powers. So this is another one of those instances where we're not saying, hey, listen, he is God. We didn't say it that way, but when you read that, that's what's being said. Jesus also receives worship in many passages throughout the New Testament. So we know that because he's receiving worship, because he's not turning that away, and because he's calling himself things like Lord of the Sabbath, these are all high Christological statements identifying him with God. We also say that Jesus is a man. Why do we say that? Because 1 Timothy 2:5, for there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus. That's all I'm going to give you on that one. Short and sweet. All right, and then Jesus is the Messiah. Matthew 16:16. When Jesus asked Peter, who do you say that I am? Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. To set that one into context, he was saying, who do the crowd say that I am? Some say that you're Elijah. You got some other possible ones thrown out there like John the Baptist raised from the dead. But who do you say that I am? You are the Christ. Okay? You are the Messiah. That's who you are. So we believe Jesus to be the Messiah. We also believe Jesus takes away the sins of the world. Romans 8:3, what the law could not do since it was limited by the flesh, God did. He condemned sin in the flesh by sending his own Son in the flesh, like one under sin's domain, and as a sin offering. And then Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead. That was part of taking away the sins of the world, right? So 1 Corinthians 15:3-8, for I passed on to you as most important what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he raised on the third day according to the scriptures. And then I tagged on, that's an early creedal statement there that the early Christians were saying and repeating over and over, and Paul says, I'm passing this along to you, what I received. But 14-20 says that if Christ hasn't raised from the dead, your faith is useless or in vain, however your translation reads. And then goes on to say, you to be pitied among all men. But in verse 20, indeed Christ has risen from the dead. So these are our Christian beliefs about Jesus. So let's compare them on a chart again. I know charts are like, they reduce things down and you don't quite get the complexity of the whole belief, but they help us to kind of see what's going on in a clear manner, like a starting point. Okay, so now we're going to look at Jesus in two different belief systems, right? Before we looked at him just from the Quran. Now we're going to look at him according to the two different beliefs. So in Christianity and in Islam, he's virgin born. Okay? See our commonalities here. He leads a sinless life according to both. He performs miracles according to both. He raises the dead. He's a sign for man. All right, so far, we actually have a lot in common we can talk about this prophet Jesus in both Islam and Christianity. And then we sort of hit this right here, that Jesus died and rose, but in Islam, no, he did not. So there is a point for you to discuss. Like, that's a good place to center on. That's where I have my debate on, and that's a good place for you to talk about. How do we know Jesus rose from the dead? That sort of conversation will be good. Why do Christians say that Jesus died and rose from the dead? Is there any evidence for that? You know, those are the kinds of things that would be good to talk about on this point. All right, we got some more. He's a prophet in both. Another great place to start, because you have a common prophet. We call him prophet, priest, and king. He's a little more, right, than just prophet, but at least we have that commonality right there, prophet. All right, then a jumping off point, right? There we go. Is God and not God. And actually, in most of my conversations, that is where I'm at. I'm talking about Jesus is either God or not God. And then kind of going back to, all right, who is God? What is he like? That's where a lot of my conversations center. But yeah, is God and not God? Some reason I've got sinless again. I guess I really wanted to stress that. I'm not sure why that's on there again. If you didn't get that, sinless, all right. And then he forgives sin. But he does not forgive sin in Islam, because only God can do that in Islam. So Jesus, when he says he's forgiving sin, that's a big deal, right? That's equating him with God. This is one of the reasons that Muslims think that our gospel, the version that we have, is corrupt. Because Jesus wouldn't do that. Jesus would teach that there is only one God, and he's the only one that's able to forgive sin. That's what a Muslim would say. All right. Another jumping off point from the 1 John passage, the creator versus created. I'm sorry, I said 1 John. I was correcting. I need to correct myself. It's John. All right, so there's a place where you can talk about him as being creator. Okay, so what we've done is we've sort of looked at some Muslim beliefs, general things that Muslims might know. Then we've looked at some specific items coming from the text. And then we looked at the Christian beliefs, and we've done some comparisons. All right, now the last thing I want to do is talk about human beliefs in general. I think this is important. And I think this is very important because when you talk to any given human being, you're dealing with a human, not with necessarily a religion. Okay, there's a difference because each human you talk to is going to have different beliefs. I have yet to talk to a single Muslim that has the exact same way of stating their beliefs. Just like Christians, right? Just like Christians. And I think I said that earlier, is that like Christians, whoever you talk to, they'll know different things about their faith according to what they've studied and where they've gone to church or what they profess. Same thing with Muslims. So I want to cover some basics about human beliefs in order to understand this contrast that we've been doing. All right. I brought Bill Nye the Science Guy with me. Bill Nye, who is a famous science popularizer, and he was the host of the Bill Nye the Science Guy show. He said the best argument against religion is a 5-minute conversation with the average religious person. That's quite a condemning statement, but if we think for a moment on the truth of that, the truth that's underlying that, we'll see that that's actually not so far from the truth, unfortunately. And for me, I find this to be somewhat, in part, not in whole, but a result of the failure to teach critical thinking in our society. And we've pulled logic out, we've pulled critical thought out. And so now I teach logic at the university. It's one of my classes. And I always tell my students, I say, well, if you're not teaching people how to think, then what are you teaching them? And they always say, what to think, right? That's why we don't think very deeply sometimes on our own views, because we're being taught what to think rather than how to think through them. That's a human problem, right? That's not necessarily us versus that. That's everybody's problem. So it's important for us to care for the life of our mind. So if you're here tonight because you're like, I have a Muslim friend and I want to talk to him, one of the best things you can do for your Muslim friend is for you to care about the life of your mind. for you to be a critical thinker, and for you to know your beliefs. That's one of the best things you can do for them. And that, goes with Romans 12, 1 through 2, that renewing of the mind so that you can discern what is good and evil. When we stop renewing our minds, we have troubles discerning good and evil and truth and falsehood. So while we've looked at these two beliefs, again, we have to think about our own beliefs. Otherwise, we end up supporting what we want to be true rather than being on that journey towards what is true, right? That's the problem of not paying attention to our minds. I've encountered that roadblock with a lot of people, by the way. The roadblock of, instead of wanting to get to truth, trying to prove what they want to be true. And that is not, even though I keep getting it from atheists towards Christians, it's not a Christian problem. It's a human problem, right? This is a human problem of trying to support what you want to be true. Because think about, if you were raised a Muslim or you were raised a Christian, and this is all you've ever known, and now somebody's challenging you that maybe your beliefs are wrong, right? That's awful. That's mortifying. And it would be painful to have to peel back through all of those beliefs and see what it is you believe and why you believe it. So I find that it's a roadblock many times to conversation. So I'm going to help you with a few things about how you can get into a conversation that is effective and will go somewhere. Whether you're talking to Muslims about who Jesus is, or you're talking to an atheist or whoever. So the first thing, I keep thinking I've gone forward. There we go. The first thing that like I said, is I want to know why I believe and what do I believe. Because I'll tell you what, Muslims, if you get a conversation with them, they like to talk about religion. So they're going to want to know what you believe and why you believe it too, right? That's going to be important. If you got nothing to offer them, how are they supposed to respect what you believe, right? When they can offer you. Muslims are more trained in apologetics than Christians are, for the most part. From what I've encountered, they have more training. So first of all, you need to figure out why you believe and what it is you believe, so you can aptly communicate that to someone else. People don't normally discuss things of which they're not confident, save politics, right? Like everybody talks about politics, even if they're not confident. But anyway, so generally speaking, you don't talk about what you're not confident in. So you may not talk to your Muslim friend because you aren't confident in your own beliefs. It may have nothing to do with them or perceptions or cultural. It may just be you're not confident with your beliefs. So from my experience, people don't talk about things they're not confident in. And from my experience, Muslims are not going to respect you if you don't know your beliefs, because it doesn't seem like you're taking your beliefs very seriously. And they sort of have that imagery of American Christians anyway. All right. So here's what we can do, though, in that Christians should be asking more questions of others' beliefs. Instead of taking what I've talked about tonight, the comparison, and saying, hey, Muslim friend, you believe this, right? Instead of doing that, use what I've given you tonight as maybe a point for you to have a little more confidence, and then say, hey, I need to ask you some things about what you believe, because I don't know. Right? I don't know Islam, or I don't know what your background is. Christians need to be doing this. We need to ask a lot more questions. One of the reasons is I've said, we don't talk about things we're not confident in. Neither do other people. Right? So if you get them talking about where they're at, what they know about their own beliefs, then they'll be more interested in talking with you, because they will be more confident. It's not intimidating as much to them. So I typically ask others to explain their own views before I engage with them. And I ask them a lot of questions, and I'm going to give you some of those questions here in just a little bit. But first, I want to give you a C.S. Lewis quote. In The Four Loves, C.S. Lewis says that the man who agrees with us that some question is of great importance can be our friend. He need not agree with us about the answer. Right? And I think you're going to find that if you do talk to Muslims, they do care about belief in God. They do take religion seriously. And if you're a Christian and you take religion seriously, you have a commonality. And you probably have common questions. Who is God? How has he revealed himself? How do I know that? These are great points to talk on. Some questions that you can ask to discern where they're at and what they know. These are great questions that I use all the time. So if I hear something like Jesus is a prophet, I'm going to say, of Islam, I'm going to say, what do you mean by that? Because really I don't know what that person means. Because I can't jump into their head to figure out what they mean. I can't read their mind. So I want to know what they mean. So I'm going to ask them that. What do you mean by that? Then I want to say, how do you know that? So first of all, I want them to clarify for me what they're saying. What do you mean by that? Then I want them to tell me what their source is. Right? Where are you getting that from? That's important. Put them back to the Quran. If it's an atheist, put them back to any source. What is the source? Get a source. So I want to know where that's coming from. Not to like shake my finger at them or say, hey, you don't got to, but to know where it's coming from. The reason that this is so important, and this is a little aside, so thank you for just the aside moment here, but I find people a lot will accuse Jesus of being just a pagan myth, right? Oh, he's like Osiris, Mithras, Horus, those guys. And I say, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, he's a myth. We got rid of all those other gods. Let's get rid of that one too. So I say, how do you know that? What's your source? That's a tough one because it's usually an internet, like an internet source, like Zeitgeist the movie, or maybe if I'm lucky, they've read Joseph Campbell, right, who did The Power of Myth, right? Maybe. But they're not reading the Egyptian Book of the Dead for the story of Osiris and Horus. They're not going back and reading the Papyri of Ani. So I want to push people back to the source because when they go back to the source for the pagan myth one, they see that how egregious that argument really is, that it's really not like the story of Jesus. So push them back. Where is that coming from? Is that in the Quran somewhere? Is it in the traditions? Is it in the Hadith, which are the sayings of Muhammad that have been collected and they explain the Quran? Where are you getting that from? So clarification, source. Now, why do you believe that? Right? What led you to this point where you were convinced that this was true? That's an important point. It allows them to give you their story. So you get the background on them so you can actually minister to them, right? Again, instead of just coming at them with a set of facts about who Jesus is from the Quran and saying, hey, Jesus looks like the greater prophet, because I'm not sure how far that's going to get you. I think if you ask them some questions about Jesus and you push for the source and you get them talking about that, now why do you believe that Muhammad's a prophet of God? That's one I've asked. Why do you believe Muhammad's a prophet of God? Why do you believe he's the greater prophet? Those are good questions, right? And it helps that person come to terms with what they believe and why they believe it. So you're doing a dual service. You're getting the information to be able to minister to them, but you're also helping them discover their own story, their own reasoning. So questions are wonderful, and we should use more of them. As Christians, we should ask a lot more. So if you see something like this, some of you may not be very outgoing. You might say, well, I'm shy. Or you might be like me and be an introvert. So you're the person in the airport that's got their back to the wall observing everybody else, right? Hoping nobody talks to you. You don't believe that about me, do you? I am. And God doesn't let me stay introverted for long. He always sends somebody my way. But if that's the case, maybe you are shy, maybe you don't have a lot of experience, just start using memes. Like, oh, you see, I love Jesus because I'm Muslim. Ask your computer screen, what do you mean by that? I know that sounds silly. It's practice. I got better at talking to people as I had more and more practice talking to people, right? To see what they would say and how it went. So what do you mean by that? What's your source for that? And why do you believe that? If you can't go to a person right away, or if you're thinking I'm a little shy, just start practicing on your family, right? When they tell you things, families love to talk politics in the home, so what do you mean by that? What's your source for that? And why do you believe that? And then have it expand out to your community, to where you are talking to your Muslim friends. This doesn't have to be hostile or aggressive whatsoever, especially here in the Western world. We do still have somewhat of a bastion of the freedom of speech where you can talk to people about these things. We haven't quite gone George Orwell's 1984 with the thought police telling us what we can and can't say or think. But anyway, so it doesn't have to be hostile. And I think what you'll find is if you take an approach of questions and conversation and truly finding out about what the person in front of you believes, I think you'll find that not only is it an effective conversation, but you will enjoy it. And you'll want to have more. And so it'll press you on further into having these great conversations. All right, I'm going to put up my contact information. This is my ministry, Confident Christianity, and you can find me on the web and on Facebook. I'm all over the place. Twitter. I'm on too much social media. You can Snapchat me if you really feel like it. That's how my daughter and I stay in contact. But there's some information for you. I'm also a professor at Houston Baptist University, and I'm going to take just a moment to tell them what's available there. We have a fully online apologetics program. So if you're interested in learning about the defense of the faith, you can do it from the privacy of your own home. Or you can come to Houston with us, trade your lovely mountains, your lovely weather, which will crack you up, but your lovely weather, because it's 90 and 80% humidity, and you can come in Houston and you can come study with us on campus. But that's available to you, and what I'm going to put in the back there with the lovely ladies at the table, I'll put a little sign-up sheet if you're interested in getting some information on that, or maybe following our email so you know where we're speaking and when, so you can come see some of the professors there, like Lee Strobel, William Lane Craig, some of those guys. And then I'll put my Confident Christianity newsletter back there. And what I do in mine is I do a little training each month and let you know where I'm at and what I'm doing. All right, guys, that is the end of what I have. And now I want to open it up to you for question and answer. Oh, thank you.
Just so you're aware, we have a microphone, and if you would go ahead and if you have a question, get Ryan's attention, and we'll get the microphone so everyone can hear. Thank you.
Whoops. I don't know how to go backwards.
I have a question for you. So after you ask the questions,
Okay.
do you have a typical scenario of what kind of transpires after that?
Yeah. You mean after you go through all the questions? Well, typically when you ask the questions, it sort of guides where you're going to go. I have a study called Why Do You Believe That? It's a apologetics-based Bible study, and it actually will walk you through like what the conversation looks like and what kinds of responses you normally get, and then what to do next. With conversations that I have, my goal personally, like the after effect, is that I want to continue having more. Like I want to go to coffee again. So the after, what happens afterwards is usually, can we meet again? Can we email again? Can we talk one more time? You don't always get that, I know. But that's usually where it goes for me, is the next conversation. Which is why on social media, I try not to be snarky in my responses to people, because I want the next chance to say something to them. So was that along the lines of what you were thinking? Okay, all right.
It sounds like that the Muslim question is like the modern day question, the scriptures have been corrupted. Oh, you Christians have written these myths and believe them. So it sounds like our apologetic needs to go towards the verification of the New Testament. How would you proceed in that fashion?
Right, that's a very good question. So the New Testament reliability specifically for Christian, for us to talk to Muslims is important. And I'm going to throw out some names of people that I would love for you to investigate because they've written on this. So Daniel Wallace, he is one of the world's leading Greek New Testament scholars, and he is doing all of the work on the reliability of the New Testament. He's going throughout the world and photographing every extant manuscript possible that he can get his hands on, for the purpose of cross-referencing the manuscripts from around the world to see, were there any errors, how accurate are they. So I would recommend Daniel Wallace and his work. just look him up and find his center. It's like the Center for the Study of the New Testament Manuscripts. He needs a smaller, like, one word phrase. One word phrase? I don't know. Also would recommend the work of Michael Licona, because Michael Licona, he's one of our professors at Houston Baptist, but he's also a well-known New Testament scholar. Oh, I'm sorry, Licona, Licona. What's great about Mike is he will do, Mike. What's great about Dr. Licona is that he will do New Testament reliability arguments against Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman's one of the number one guys leading the way for New Testament corruption, and Muslims will quote Bart Ehrman. So I would definitely recommend following that. I don't know that if he was a Jew in his, I didn't read that far back into his bio. I think his wife may be Christian, and that he is agnostic. Yeah, and he's a professor at the University of North Carolina. Okay. So if you've, I had a guy, I just got to say this because it's incredibly funny, actually. Well, to me, maybe not to you, but I had a guy on a plane next to me who said, we had been arguing through these questions, and he changed the argument. We were talking about something completely different, which was empirical evidence and science. And then he said, but the Bible is horribly corrupted. Everybody knows that. And I said to this guy, where are you getting that from? What's your source? And he said, I don't know. And I said, do you watch a lot of maybe History Channel, Discovery Channel? Do you watch some of these channels that do the Bible story things around Easter and Christmas? And he's like, yeah. And I said, have you ever heard of Bart Ehrman? He said, that sounds familiar. And I was like, yeah, you need to actually look at Mike Licona's debates with Bart Ehrman, because you're getting that from a single source, which is him. But there's a lot of scholars in this area. So I would look up what they have to say. You can also talk about the difference of, and I don't have all the sources for you tonight, but you could talk about the difference between the New Testament text reliability, that we have 24,000 manuscripts to cross-reference to see if there's any evidence of corruption, dating all the way back to 150 AD, when you get into the Ryland papyri. And we have a full Bible from the 300s, which is not that long after, it's the Codex Sinaiticus. It's not that long after Christianity exploded onto the scene. And then you have arguments for the latest datings of the writings in the New Testament being around the 90 AD, which is really not that long. Then compare it to the Muslim arguments for the reliability of the Quran. And we find that at one point, one of the four rightly guided caliphs, Uthman, he actually collected up all the existing Qurans and had all of them burned but one. So, and I think it was one. It may be just but a few, but I think it's just one. But he had all the others burned. Sorry, that's just me having travel brain. But anyway, so Uthman, look at what he did as far as getting rid of everything else. I think the argument from Muslims is that, well, those were corrupt. There was a lot of arguments about corruption of the Quran, and so Uthman was trying to do a good thing by getting rid of all the corrupt Qurans and then just going with this one. But the problem for that is, see, Christianity's never had that, right? We've never had all the others, so we can go cross-reference with all these. The Quran doesn't have that. Right? So that's a huge discrepancy between the reliability of the two texts. So if you look up the Caliph Uthman, it's Uthman, and reliability of the Quran, to see there what happened way back when, what he did. Yes?
Now I have an easy one.
Oh, okay.
After that. There are so many reports floating around now about supernatural visitations among the Muslim community to bring salvation to them. Have you had any personal experience with that? Do you lend any credence to these reports?
Okay. So I was raised an atheist. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I was an atheist growing up. So I always have science was my thing. Science, music, art, the ocean, right? So I'm always very skeptical of supernatural anything. And in fact, I always tell people, I feel like God has to smack me in the head because I'm so unresponsive to the supernatural realm because of my upbringing. I'm always very skeptical. But having said that, and worked with a lot of the Muslims, like in ministry to Muslims, there's one called Ministry to Muslims, I find that that is a critique, that's sort of an American and a Westerner thing, is that we don't seem to have a lot of those experiences, but when I talk to people who have come out of Islam, they seem to have much more of those. In fact, in Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, Nabil talks about his. He's actually told me about it, about how it was so hard for him to leave Islam because of the expectations on him as the boy in the family. He had a sister, but he's the boy. And so there was so much expectation on him to follow Islam, to be a leader in his community, that when he had come to the point where rationally he could not say that Jesus didn't rise from the dead, like he had accepted rationally that Jesus was who he said he was and that he rose from the dead. But he didn't commit to him because it was so hard to do so. So he prayed to God and said, hey, I need something. Like, you need to show me the reality of who you are. And so he says he received a vision. He received crosses on the wall just before him like it was middle of the day. Have I ever experienced that? No. I have not. And I don't know why. I don't know why it is that would be something that he would see and I wouldn't. But I hear that a lot from Muslims. So I think you're right. And I think there is some credence to that. What I don't know is why God would do one for somebody and not for somebody else. I don't know. That's the only thing I can tell you, is that he knows what each of us needs, but sometimes I tell him, hey, I would like one of those. Because one kid asked me at a camp one time, have you ever heard God speak to you audibly? And I said, no. All right, next question. And they were like, I didn't know where I was going with that, but maybe he had some experience or somebody else had, said something to him. So I think there is credence to that. I just don't have any experience with it. That was a long way around. You said it was going to be easy, and I took a lot of time. Yes, sir.
Just wonder if you play around a little role playing, if you'd ask me, why do Jews always answer a question with a question?
Why do Jews always answer a question with a question?
Why not?
Hey, all right.
I was curious why, I've got so many notes, but I'll start with the very first one.
Okay.
That struck me, which was the virgin birth. So here's the question I would ask that I didn't hear you saying. I would ask a Muslim, well, who do you think the father is?
Yeah.
So have you ever done that?
I actually haven't asked a Muslim, who do you think the father is? That's a good question.
Because we should be able to say who we think the father is.
Yeah. Well, I know that Muslims would think that's weird, that God would impregnate a woman. They would have troubles getting past, like, is that a sexual act, or what is that? Why would God do that? But I don't think they would probably view that from their theology, their very high view of God, that he wouldn't lower himself to interact that way with a human, especially not. You would have to get him past this sexual aspect. Like, there's not a sexual aspect to this.
But it wasn't midichlorians. I'm going to agree.
Oh, he brought in a Star Wars quote. Boom, drop the mic. All right. We just finished Clone Wars, and we've gotten through 2 seasons of Rebels. All right. I can't believe I'm watching a children's cartoon, and yes, I am. Do you have more? I'm sorry.
My best friend in Florida converted from Christianity to Islam. How do you deal with somebody who's known the truth and rejected it?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to write a note. That's really tough, because you're dealing with human beliefs again, and you're dealing with the human story. So people have different hurts and different, like, sometimes they can, like I said, know the truth and then not, and they will not choose to follow it, even if they know it, because they just don't want to. They have free will. They're able to choose not to. So with a person who has willfully rejected the truth, I would say, I don't have it up there. I would go back through the why do you believe this? What brought you to this point? Give me the path. I want to see what you investigated, what your sources were, what convinced you that those were true. So, not just for Christians, but for somebody else, like for a Muslim. Did you investigate this? What did you read on this? And how did you come to this point? Like, has she read Surah 4, the chapter where it talks about how many wives you can have and the beating of women? Has she read that? Because it was in my second debate, was the view of women in Islam and Christianity. And that's a pretty contentious point that... Yeah, we actually... Sorry. Yeah. In our house, we say there is a too smart for your own good, and that's when you don't know what you don't know. Right? Like Socrates knew that the more he knew, the less he knew he knew. So that's where people can be very proud of their intelligence, and so it blocks them from being open to things that aren't already within their framework or with what they want to be true. And folks, this is a very important point. Francis Bacon, when he was refuting Aristotelian logic, he wrote a thing called the New Organon. And in this, he wrote that there are 4 idols of the human mind. And these idols block us from truth. And like the first one is, you're a human. The kind of thing you are, your nature. Like, because you tend to bring in anything that confirms what you want to be true, and you tend to block out anything that you don't want. Right? So that, like, the first thing. And then he talks about Plato's cave, the problem of your education and your background. You don't have experience in some things, so you don't know about them or whatever, So your background keeps you from truth. And he went on and said, the words we use are badly abstracted, and sometimes we don't really know what we're talking about. That can keep you from truth. And then he wraps it up by saying, and then theories and philosophical dogmas can keep you from truth. So it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do, right? How can I know anything at all? And that's why the Bible's so adamant about the renewing of the mind. Because I truly believe humans can rationalize anything they want to be true. So I would just start peeling back. I keep pointing up there, but it was my questions. Peel her back with a lot of questions and walk through that with her and have her source it and source it and source it over and over. Well, it's from the Quran, but what did Muhammad teach on this from the Hadith? Why do you believe that a woman, if a man fears disobedience from a woman, that he should admonish her, then not have sex with her, banish her to beds apart, and then beat her. Idrib is the Arabic word, which is translated beat, even though modern Muslims will say, no, it's a light tap or something. But you've got to deal with some of these hard things in Islam. You also have to deal with the fact that in Christianity, Jesus has said, today you will be with me in paradise, to the man that was hanging on the cross next to him. You have a surety. Luke said, I write these things to you because you know the certainty of the things you've been taught. You don't find any certainty in Islam, not even in Muhammad, right? By the way, another one, sorry, here's all the background coming out, but because it's a woman, right? Yeah, in the Hadith, there's 48 individual Hadith that say women are a majority in hell. And it's because they curse too much, they don't respect their husbands, they lack intelligence, and they are deficient in religion due to their menstrual cycle, because they can't worship when they're on their periods. She needs to handle those things. But before that, just kind of ask those questions.
I can't use the Bible at all with her because she believes that the whole Bible is enough.
Well, yeah, that's Muslim, right? You might be able to use the greater prophet from the text of the Quran. That might be something, because if Jesus is the one that gave the correct Injil, it's interesting. He's the greatest prophet, not Muhammad. So we got to get back to who Jesus is and how we know what he said was true. So you got some more maybe New Testament reliability, like this gentleman said. And one more for you, Jim Warner Wallace, Cold Case Christianity. You go. Oh, that was, yeah, it does. It was a situation where Muhammad was being asked to be an arbiter between two Jews who had an issue. And he's basically telling them, you got your law, you guys got your book. You should use that. Don't come to me, go to your book. So that's what it's talking about. Yeah,
I'm going to throw out two terms,
okay,
jihad and infidel.
okay.
And could you define how those apply?
All right, I'll try. An infidel is an unbeliever. Is not a believer in Allah, right? Somebody who is not part of the Muslim community. There's actually, I shouldn't say it's just that, but that's a good starting point. Jihad has two different backgrounds to it, and Muslims will have two different viewpoints on it. There is one viewpoint is that jihad is the personal internal struggle between, for you spiritually, with your relationship with God. So if you talk to Muslims about jihad, they may not view it as a military action, not as violence against unbelievers, but as interpersonal struggle, like struggling with your own problems in your own self. So that could be your jihad, especially if you're a westernized moderate Muslim. Okay. Then there's the other types of jihad, like what we're seeing with ISIS, and that has some very deep roots. That goes back to the fact that the believers in Islam, they're supposed to be bringing peace, right? Islam is supposed to bring peace to the world, to their land, and then to the world. Well, the unbelievers, the ones who aren't under the submission of Allah, who haven't been subjected themselves or submitted themselves to that peace that Islam brings, they're oppressors, and they're keeping the world from coming under the peace of Islam. So in that case, you as a Muslim, part of your jihad is to strive against that, to bring the peace of Islam to the whole world. And so that is where you have more of a military view of it. And if you look at the chapter 9 in the Quran, Surah 9, that's where Muhammad expressly says you're to fight the unbelievers and that you're to subdue them wherever you find them. And that from there you get more of a military type feel to jihad. And in fact, Muhammad himself, I think it's in the traditions, is where he says that he would, if he could come back to life, he would come back and be martyred for the faith in jihad. That's what he would do. So you've got two different versions going on. One jihad is a militant jihad that's allowed to use force for the purpose of it's a defensive war. I need to say that. It's a defensive war. The violence is used in defense against the oppressors who are not under the peace of Islam. Okay, so they're allowed to fight in a defensive war. And if you've ever talked to a Muslim about this, they may have said that. Like, we're not allowed to just like go out and be aggressors. This is defensive. This is coming from their beliefs. That the unbeliever is the oppressor, right? So you're, in that case, to bring the whole world under peace of Islam, you are to fight against them. Does that make some sense? It's kind of an odd way about doing things.
Are not some Muslims subject to jihad from other Muslims?
Oh yeah. You've got because you don't have like one central system of belief governing all of Islam. You have a whole bunch of different beliefs in Islam. So you'll have like the Sufis, who are the mystics in Islam, who would not adhere to a militant view of jihad, or the Ahmadis, the Ahmadiyya Muslims. They don't believe that jihad includes any kind of violence or military action. So those kind of groups, which are deemed heretical by like Sunnis, and Sunnis are 85% of the Muslims in the world, they can come under that apostate type thing. You're heretical, and so therefore you're not bringing the peace of Islam, so they could be fought against as well. That's the reasoning that I have heard, but probably not the only one. Yes, and they are oppressed, but they're usually oppressed because they're not part of the community of Islam, according to some Muslims, right? So, yeah. Yes, sir.
Question going off of that. In your conversations with Muslims, due to the rise of like ISIS and some of these militant attacks, have you noticed a trend in the Muslims that you're talking to, either maybe towards militant understanding of jihad or way like the opposite direction as a result of some of these attacks and some of the stuff we're seeing?
Yeah, you know what? I do not encounter many Muslims in the West, and I don't go over to the Middle East, but I don't encounter many Muslims here that have a militant view of jihad. Okay, and I think they've been westernized in part. If you look at what ISIS believes that it's doing, it believes that it's returning to a conservative view, the actual view of what Muhammad did. And if you look at the history of Islam, Muhammad himself did lead raids and military campaigns. Surah 9, you've got that right there. So I think what ISIS believes they're doing is returning back to a pure form of Islam. So that, I don't encounter people that agree with them that much, but I think, and I've read, Nabil actually talked about this, because of the internet, because of access to the internet, you have people putting out messages, return to Islam. Just like that, not to the pure form, not to, just return to Islam. This is Islam. And that's sort of what ISIS is promoting themselves as. They are the real believers. And so you could sort of radicalize people really fast over the internet with these messages because they want to be part of the people who are bringing peace to the earth, to bring it all under submission to Allah so that we can finally have that peace. So I don't encounter them very much. In fact, I'm trying to think back through all the guys that I've talked to at our school. We have Muslims at Houston Baptist University, and none of them are believers in militant jihad.
Well, friends, we've hit 7:30, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up the evening. Can we say thank you again to Mary Jo Sharp?
Thank you.
If you could, feel free to take those cards, turn them back in the back. We'd love to have some of that information to follow up. Feel free to stay and talk and have something to drink. And thank you for being here this evening, and we'll see you next time.